right, let's face it. Fishing line ain't sexy, right? It's not like a new lure. It's not like a fancy rod and reel, the latest technology. You just can't wait to get out on the water. All it does is connect you to your fish. But think about that. It connects you to your fish. And when it breaks your heart. Present day anglers have three main options when it comes to fishing line. Let's take a look at some of the pros and some of the cons. All right, so a lot of people think braid is a new option. Actually, it's the oldest of options. Cavemen fish with braided line. Now, current braid is a lot different than what they fish with. You got two basic types. You got Dyneema and Spectra. You also, within that, have fused braid and unfused braid. Fused braid is much stiffer. It's less likely to wrap around your rod tips. Unfused braid is a lot softer. Now, anglers have different preferences. I personally like fused braid. Now, this is how braid looks. The big advantage of this stuff is that it has zero stretch. Boy, you throw a bait out with braided line, you can feel everything that happens to that bait. You can feel every nook and cranny on the bottom. And believe me, when a fish strikes, you know it instantly. Now, a disadvantage of the stuff is it's very, very expensive relative to, say, monofilament. Not quite so much compared to fluorocarbon, which is also expensive, but monofilament is a whole lot cheaper than braid. Another big disadvantage is that braid is highly visible to fish. They can really see it well. When you're fishing clear water, it spooks a lot of fish and they will not bite lures that are tied directly to braid. You can overcome that by tying leader. I particularly like a leader of fluorocarbon tied to my braid, tied with a double uni knot. That totally gets around the problem of the visibility of braid. Another problem is that the lack of stretch in braid sometimes will cost you fish. Think about it. You set the hook on a fish, there's no give. Particularly if you're using a medium heavy rod or even a heavy rod, there's no give. And so that fish has a lot of leverage to throw that hook. Okay, now the old standby for many anglers is monofilament, right? This is what we all used when we were kids. It's been around at least that long, right? Now, monofilament definitely has some advantages as well. Now, it's obviously the most inexpensive of the three main types of fishing line. You can get this stuff really, really cheap. You know, there is some variance, and certainly you do get what you pay for. The higher end lines are going to be more expensive, but they're going to be a lot more durable. Monofilament floats, and that's a big advantage, particularly when you want to fish topwater baits or twitch baits. You want something that's going to stay up in that water column, right, and not sink down and pull your bait down. It's also very, very forgiving. Monofilament has a lot of stretch. It's very, very elastic. It's easy to tie knots with, and it's way less visible than braid. It's also among the most abrasion resistant. When you're fishing braid, a lot of times around rocks and stuff like that, the edges of it can get really frayed. That happens less frequently with monofilament because it's so smooth. Now, a big negative with this stuff is that it's way less sensitive. In fact, if you're one of the anglers who has switched over to braid and you try and go back to monofilament, boy, you just cannot feel the strikes. I know I personally hate this stuff. I made the jump to braid at least a decade ago, and whenever I grab a rod that happens to have some mono on it, it just feels so insensitive. I cannot detect strikes with it, so I'm not a monofilament fan. Also, another negative is, you know, as you can see on this spool, monofilament has some memory. It maintains the circular pattern of the spool that it comes on, and that tends to solidify over time. As you move along in time and it sits on that spool, even on your reel, it really has a lot of memory. Also, UV tends to break it down. And hey, look, we all spend a lot of time in the sun fishing, and when that stuff just sits under the sunlight, it tends to break down, reduces some of its strength. All right, and the third and final option is really kind of the newcomer to the block, and it's fluorocarbon. This stuff is fantastic. It is absolutely awesome. It does have some cons as well, but it's got a whole lot of pros. Now, the good thing with fluoro is it's the same refractivity of water, so it's almost entirely invisible once you submerge it, so fish are not going to see it. When I fish with braid, it always has a fluorocarbon leader. How long I tie it depends on how clear the water is. Really, really clear water, I'm going to fish at least a 6-foot leader. The water's kind of murky, maybe 3 feet or so is fine. Now, fluoro is a whole lot denser than monofilament. It is a monofilament. It's only one strand, but it's a lot denser, and that gives you a lot more sensitivity than mono. It doesn't have the same level of sensitivity as braid, but it's a whole lot better than monofilament. also fluorocarbon sinks. So it's bad for topwater baits, for stick baits, but it's fantastic for jigging. If you're gonna work a ledge and you want a bait that's gonna get all the way down, maybe say working bridge pilings or the causeway or the trestle, something like that where you gotta get down to the bottom, fluoro's the way to go. Now, a big problem with fluoro is that it's really stiff. This line here is only 8 pounds. You can tell it's just really stiff for 8-pound test relative to mono. It's also got a whole lot of memory, and a lot of times when you try and spool it on a spinning reel, it kind of wants to just jump off the reel. That can be a big problem. I like fluoro exclusively as leader material, but a lot of people now, and you know, the price of fluoro has come down a lot, so a lot of people are actually spooling it on their reels and using it as their main line. Hey, great, more power to you if that's what you want to do. I'm still sticking with my braid and tying this fluoro leader on there. I just love it. Oh, another disadvantage of fluoro relative to mono is a cost. It is definitely a lot more expensive. Some really good high-end fluoros are even more expensive than braid. So that's your 3 main options for fishing line. Boy, you go into a sporting goods store, you're gonna see them all. You got all kinds of brands and pound tests, different strengths, all that good stuff. But those are the 3 main different types of fishing line. Try them all, see what works for you. Different people have different preferences, no doubt about it. Just see what you like and what works for you. Well, that's it. Hopefully you liked the video. If you did, be sure and click the like button. And always subscribe to Marsh Man Masson on YouTube. Tell all your friends. Plenty more videos where this one came from.